Hi. Hi, you guys. It's me, Miss Fry. um, all right. We left off with Lady Thornton asking Ada if she would show her where she grew up. And the last chapter, the last sentence, but she brought me to Susan. I couldn't say no. Okay. All right. Chapter 56. Lady Thornton had the name written on a piece of paper. My first address from the records kept with the WVS, a place called Elsa Street. I'd never known the name. Elsa Street, said one of the elegantly dressed men behind the hotel counter. Never heard of it. Is that in Mayfair? I highly doubt it. Lady Thornton drew herself up and looked at him down the side of her nose. I believe it's in the East End. The man harumphed inside and finally got out a large book of maps and searched until he had his finger on a small piece of London. Elsa Street. Very good, Lady Thornton said. What's the best way to get there? It looks far for walking. The man gulped. Excuse me, guys. Madam, you cannot walk there, he said. Do we take the train? That would be an enjoyable adventure. Trains don't run there, madam, the man said. Lady Thornton grew even more imperious. What do you mean trains don't run there? We are talking about the city of London, not the back of beyond. Madam, I like that phrase, the back of beyond. The man pushed the map toward her. The central line was expanding to Bethnal Green, but they stopped on account of the war. There's no trains near there. Then we'll take a taxi, Lady Thornton said. The doorman found her a cab. The cab driver looked horrified. Elsa Street, he said. You don't really... I am quite tired, Lady Thornton said pleasantly, of being told what I do and do not want. She turned to me as the cab pulled away. You live there, Ada. Do you feel it was unsafe? She still had no understanding. Were you ever unsafe? Lady Thornton persisted. I was never safe, I said. After a long moment during which she stared at me, I said, I think that was mostly ma'am, not Elsa Street. Was Jamie unsafe? She asked. Poor, yes. Underfed, yes. But unsafe as a child. I didn't know. How could I know? In daylight, Lady Thornton added, as though that made a difference. We drove past the burned shell of a department store that had caught fire in the Blitz, later past the wrecked buildings surrounding St. Paul's, then into new neighborhoods not nearly as heavily damaged, but beginning to resemble the old view out my window. Narrow streets, buildings jammed together in tight rows, no grass, no bushes, no trees. We're back on Oxford Street, the cab driver said. My goodness, said Lady Thornton. The driver pulled up beside a gray stone church with a square tower. St. Mary's? I asked. Jamie used to speak of St. Mary's. I'd never actually seen it. St. Dunstan and All Saints, he said. Back of the yard, that's White Horse Street. Left to the corner was Elsa. I'll wait here. Notice he said was Elsa Street. As soon as we got out of the cab, I understood why he hadn't driven us all the way there. Bombs had fallen everywhere around St. Dunstan's. What had been houses and shops facing the church was now nothing but broken bricks and boards. We walked slowly past the church. On the far side, some houses still stood, partially damaged, but when we looked left, Elsa Street was gone. There was no longer even a street, no longer a clear path between the piles of rubble that cascaded from both sides. No noises, no dust. The wreckage had been scoured clean by rain and wind. It was empty of people or any other living things. A makeshift flag flew from the top of one pile. Nothing else moved. Ada, Lady Thornton said, choking a little. There was a pub below our flat where Ma'am worked nights, I said. Out my window, I could see a fishmonger's shop and a pawn shop and a bit of what was a grocery. We had a butcher shop, too. Once Jamie nicked a chop for me. He used to run down to the docks and watch the ships come in. And the school we evacuated from, it wasn't far away. I searched, but couldn't begin to make sense of the destruction. Somewhere, there'd been a room where I was held prisoner. Somewhere, a lane filled with people I recognized, who sometimes stopped to wave at me. Maybe it had been here. It didn't exist anymore. Lady Thornton had tears in her eyes. Ma'am was dead. Elsa Street was gone. I really was never, ever going back. I slid my hand into Lady Thornton's. "Thank you," I said. "Aw." "Oh, my dear," she said, her fingers tightening around mine. "This could have been what happened to you." Chapter 57. I was alive. Susan was alive. Lady Thornton and I went home, leaving Susan in London to finish her recovery. I could picture her in my mind, sitting in her bed in hospital, reading the letters Jamie and I sent her, so it was okay. Hard, but okay. Excuse me. I wrote to... Allergies. I wrote to Ruth via her London address. The letter got to her somehow, wherever she was, and she wrote back. "I'm so glad about Susan. Send her my love." I told Ruth about Elsa Street. She wrote, "Now you have no home like me." "We have a home," I wrote back. "Jamie says our cave is big enough for everyone." At the Ellistons, Jamie slept in an old-fashioned bed cupboard built into the wall of the farmhouse kitchen. Like a Murphy bed. You ever seen one of those? It's like a cabinet that you pull down and there's a bed in it. I had one in my first apartment in Denver. It was exactly like a small, cozy cave. I almost felt envious when I saw it. "The Ellistons liked me," Jamie said. "They liked having a boy on the farm again." A few weeks later, Susan came home. Dr. Graham went to fetch her to spare her the train ride. She was breathing fine, but still very weak. Lady Thornton and I planned and cooked a gala celebration meal with a roast chicken, Penelope, watercress salad, tinned fruit we'd been saving for a special occasion, and a boiled pudding using the remaining jar of last summer's blackberry jam. We invited everyone, Dr. Graham, Fred, the Ellistons, the Land girls, everyone except Maggie, who was still stuck at school. One chicken for 10 people didn't go far, but it tasted wonderful, and anyhow, I roasted a mountain of potatoes to go with it. I kept wanting to stare at Susan, just stare at her, put extra sugar in her tea and watch her while she sipped it, watch her while she breathed. "Ada," Susan said halfway through the evening, "stop hovering. I'm well." "I'm not hovering," as though I knew what that meant. "Hovering, hanging around me in the manner of a hummingbird or a housefly. You most certainly are. You can be easy now." "I am easy." "It was never your job to take care of me." "It was," I said. "It should be." "Archaic," she said, as though reading my mind. "Your definition of the word ward is archaic. No longer valid. It is once again my job to take care of you." She patted my hand. When I couldn't do it, Lady Thornton did it for me. My head snapped up. I looked at Lady Thornton, who gave me a quick smile on her way to the kitchen for more potatoes. "She did," I said, swallowing hard. I had been so anxious over Susan that I hadn't even realized it. I might have claimed I was taking care of myself. I'd felt alone, but I hadn't been. It seemed so strange. I'd trusted Lady Thornton, almost the way I trusted Susan. Maybe she wasn't a terrible mother. "I know," Susan said. "I didn't worry. I knew you and Jamie were in good hands." Good hands? Lady Thornton's hands. Lady Thornton's good hands. Who would have thought? "Dear Maggie," I wrote, "your mother looked happiest in London when she was talking about the things she used to do with you. She was glad to show me things, but only because they reminded her of being there with you. I think she loves you more than you think." "Dear Ada," Maggie wrote, "I am miserable. Tell my mother I must come home." Aww. Oh, you guys. Okay, here we go. Chapter 58. Susan and I were scheduled to fire watch, but of course Susan wasn't well enough to do it yet, so Lady Thornton volunteered in her place. We had a late shift, 2 a.m. until 4. Lady Thornton set her alarm clock and woke me. It was a white, bright, moonlit night, the glare from the full moon reflecting on ground covered with snow. Since my summer watch with Maggie, I'd been fire watching over and over again. Nothing ever happened. Each time I climbed the steeple, it grew just a little bit easier, but my fear never went entirely away. It helped me some to understand why I was afraid. "Does being up here make you feel like you're back in London?" Lady Thornton asked. She stood on the parapet, binoculars trained to the sky. "What?" "The look on your face. It's the same look you had when we went to see your old street." I stared at her, A little, I said. I don't want to be trapped. Lady Thornton started to reply. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words. They were drowned by a sudden, unexpected, high-pitched wail. The village air raid sirens. Bombs, real bombs coming toward us. The first in months. Lady Thornton whipped around, straining her eyes in the sky. I did too. Off to the left, over the hills, we could see tiny shapes in the moonlit sky. Airplanes. Bombers, I shouted. Those are the big planes, the ones in the center, and smaller fighter planes surrounded them. So that's how the Germans would do it. Big planes in the middle, the ones that would drop the bombs, but they weren't great at firing against the attack. So they had smaller planes around the big bombers to kind of do the fighting, while the bomber planes just worked on dropping the bombs. So after Ada shouts bombers, Lady Thornton says, yes, pay attention. We needed to know where the bombs hit, where the fires might be. The sirens kept going. I imagined Susan and Jamie running down the steps of the cottage, taking cover in our Anderson shelter. I imagined Fred and the land girls running to theirs. Small dark shapes fell from the bombers' bellies, exploding when they hit the ground. Flames flickered and vanished, extinguished by the snow. Thank heaven for the snow. Spitfires from our airfield rose up to engage the German planes, the smaller ones on the outside. I heard the clatter of anti-aircraft guns, saw the bright streaks of their fire in the sky, and then far above us and still quite far away, a Messerschmitt burst into flames. It fell in a long burning arc. It roared straight past the steeple, missing us by feet, not miles, and crashed with a horrible squeal of twisted metal and a shattering of bricks and glass right onto the village main street. We could feel the heat from the flames. We could smell the burning aviation fuel. Lady Thornton and I stood on the steeple, watching, until the sirens sounded all clear. The rest of the German squadron was over the channel, and we were certain nothing in the village except the Messerschmitt was on fire. Then we went down the stairs. I wasn't trapped. My heart hammered, but my footsteps never faltered. On the street, local defense volunteers worked with hand pumps to put out the blaze. Through sheer luck, no houses had been destroyed. The newsagent's shop had taken a direct hit, but I knew the man who owned it didn't live inside. The heat was so intense we couldn't get close. We stood with our backs pressed against the cemetery wall. Half the village watched, the only noise the crackle of the flames. As they began to subside, Lady Thornton stepped forward and ducked to look into the wreck. She straightened, her expression horror-struck. I thought the pilot had bailed out, she said. Didn't he? No. Halfway home, Lady Thornton leaned over and was sick in the road. She wiped her mouth with her handkerchief. Her hands trembled. He was burned up, she said. He'd been a German, a man, a pilot, the same as Jonathan once his uniform was gone. Oh, she's thinking of Jonathan. Chapter 59. At home, Lady Thornton sank onto her chair in the cold, blacked-out living room. Aren't you going to bed? I asked her. It was still hours before dawn. Do you think he suffered? She asked. I didn't know whether she meant Jonathan or the German pilot. I didn't know what to say. I'd burned my arm once cooking. It had hurt a lot. I put coal on the banked fire and stirred it up. Will I make tea? Lady Thornton didn't answer. I repeated the question. She looked up. No. Susan wasn't in her bedroom. She and Jamie had fallen asleep in the Anderson shelter, cocooned in blankets together. When I opened the shelter door, she untangled herself and held me tight. You smell like petrol, she said. How close were the airplanes? Was it dreadful? I said, Lady Thornton has fallen to pieces. Susan put Jamie back to bed. She stayed awake with Lady Thornton and me. She made tea, which Lady Thornton ignored. She covered Lady Thornton with a blanket and sat beside her in the cold morning darkness. Go on to sleep, Ada, Susan said. My turn. I went up to my solitary bedroom and burrowed beneath the blankets. After a long time, I fell asleep. Hours later, Jamie shook me awake. Mom's sleeping on the couch, he said. Lady Thornton's eyes are open, but she won't talk. No matter what I say to her, she won't even look at me. I said, She saw a dead pilot in the village and the German plane that went down. Jamie's forehead creased. So she can't talk because she's too sad? That's right. I pushed the covers away. Come, I need your help. Lady Thornton was trapped. I knew what I had to do. Ida to the rescue. You think what she might do? How she might help? And poor Lady Thornton. Poor thing. Oh, okay. That's where we're going to stop. We'll finish the rest tomorrow. Oh, I guess. If I lose the book on accident, purpose accident, just so we don't have to stop it. Okay, you guys, I hope you've had a good day. I miss you, and we'll see you tomorrow. We'll have a long morning meeting, a little review session. Don't worry if you didn't get the work done. Due on Friday. It's okay. Take care of yourselves. Don't stress, okay? All right. Bye, you guys.